Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. So glad you tuned in today. Thanks for joining us. We have a very uplifting show because today we're talking about foods that can actually fight brain conditions like ADHD, depression, anxiety, and more. My guest is Dr. Uma Haidu, the author of the new book called This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, PTSD, ADHD, anxiety, OCD, and more. Dr. Naidu, thank you so much for being here today. It's nice to see you.
Thank you so much, Lori. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
So, you are actually a nutritional psychiatrist and professional chef. So, you're perfect to talk about the link between foods and our mental health. What made you decide to write this book?
So many things, Lori, but mostly I think it's when I thought about it more carefully, it really goes back to my childhood. I grew up my book is dedicated to my maternal grandmother, and she was a very pan-spiritual person. She taught me just elements of nutrition and food. We would pick healthy vegetables from the garden because I skipped out on preschool when my mom was at medical school, and I wanted to spend time with my grandma. And so she'd be cooking in the kitchen. We'd eat our meals together. But also, when I say pan spiritual, we had the Hindu deities in the home, in a prayer place, but we also had a picture of Christ. And I say that because I think that I brought that openness with me to psychiatry and to mental health, feeling that people needed more options just to feel emotionally better. And that it wasn't just about, the power of a prescription pad. So as I evolved into becoming a psychiatrist, of course, I took a detour and studied nutrition, and I went to culinary school as well. But those things were able to come together in a way that I feel very fortunate in nutritional psychiatry, which is really the use of healthy foods and nutrients to feel emotionally better. It doesn't exclude the use of medications when needed, but it provides individuals with an additional tool in their toolkit to really uplift their mental health.
Well, I think it's extremely encouraging because so many people, particularly in this pandemic, have been suffering from anxiety and depression. And really, what you say in this book is the first thing that can help us turn those conditions around is eating right. And we know during the pandemic, so many people have been eating the wrong types of food, comfort foods that make us feel initially
Right.
good, but very soon
Right.
afterwards actually have the opposite effect. Can you elaborate on that a little?
Absolutely, Roy. You have that exactly right. What I like to say is, the foods that we call comfort foods are actually discomfort for our brain, and that's just one way of sharing with people that they're not the best options for our brain and for our physical health, for that matter. But essentially, what happens is when we eat something like a sugary donut, which is a less healthy option, what happens is that serotonin is made in the brain and it actually can create an uplifted mood. But unfortunately, insulin is also secreted in the body. And over time, unfortunately, can really lead to things like brain damage. A colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Daniel Aben, has done this research on the impact of sugar and high sugar on, MRI imaging in the brain and the long-term effects. So I think it's important for us to understand that, those foods may make us feel nice for a short time, but ultimately they really are not great for us.
Can you again sort of drill down on the impact of sugar in particular? I know you like to
Yes.
talk about other products as well, all types of
Yeah.
processed
Yeah.
foods, but sugar in
Sure.
particular and the brain and how it can be harmful because a lot of people know sugar can make us overweight, but they seem to think it stops there.
That's right. You're absolutely right. We are so used to having these conversations with a doctor around, a family history of diabetes or some pounds that we gained during COVID, of which, by the way, many people are struggling with that. But the reality, Laurie, is that sugar has been shown in several research studies to worsen depression, to worsen anxiety, to basically impact these things in a way that is really not good for us. And it's not as though anymore it's just a thought that maybe we don't feel good. This has now been shown, and I think we need to start paying attention to it. The problem is that I think that people get caught up in that good feeling, right? And that they feel initially, and they don't realize that the calming effect initially of serotonin also causes these long-term effects that are worse for our brain. So, for example, when we have insulin released in the body, there is a way in which tryptophan, which is a natural amino acid building block for serotonin, it is actually starts to enter the brain and is converted to serotonin. So people are absolutely right. They do feel that uplifting feeling for a few minutes, but the problem is these long-term effects. Studies have shown that, a recent study in February in Journal of Nutrition showed that many foods are created with these extra sugars and additives that almost addictive. They are made hyper palatable. And when we eat these foods, we want more of them. And other studies have shown that the way that sugar is impacted in the brain actually affects the reward pathways where dopamine is involved, the neurochemical dopamine. And that is the exact same neurochemical that is affected when someone is abusing a drug like cocaine. So, what we need to understand is that sugar can actually become addictive, and the long term effects of eating those sugary treats, having that nice feeling for a few minutes, ultimately causes very high blood sugar levels over time and are associated with things like brain atrophy and dementia. So, eating those simple carbohydrates and those sugary foods ultimately are not good for us in so many ways.
Can you talk about the effect of sugar and chronic fatigue? A lot of people, when they eat sugar, they feel so tired and sluggish afterward, and they don't realize, why they don't have any energy to just get through life.
Absolutely. One of the things that we also just need to break down a little bit is the gut brain connection. And the reason I say that is that the gut brain connection is not something that, if you went to medical school 2 decades ago, it wasn't something that doctors studied. It's an area of research that in the last 2 decades has really burgeoned. And I'm mentioning this for a reason because sugar is one of those things that impacts the gut brain axis. So people talk about the gut microbiome or the gut microbiota. Essentially, the gut and brain, even though they are in different parts of the body, they actually arise from the very same cells in the embryo. And then they divide up and form these two organs, and then they remain connected throughout life by a single cranial nerve, the 10th cranial nerve called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve acts like a two-way superhighway, working 24/7, 365 days a year, allowing for chemical messaging back and forth. And the importance of this is that the brain and the gut are always communicating. Now, another thing that people should know, especially for pandemic times, is that 70% of our immune system is the gut. So how we eat also affects our immunity. And in addition to that, people know about medications like Prozac or Zoloft, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, but more than 90% of the receptors for serotonin are in the gut. So when people understand a little bit of that background, they also understand that there might be a way in which food therefore impacts how we feel. So if we take it back to sugar, the more sugar we eat, there are these, 39 odd trillion microbes that are living in our gut that are there to really help and protect us. But there are also some bad guys amongst them. And when we eat a healthy salad, we know from research that within a 24-hour period, those microbes in our gut start to change. They might change in a good way or a not so good way. When we're feeding those microbes sugary treats, lots of added refined sugars, lots of soda, what unfortunately happens is the bad microbes get fed. And when they get fed those sugary foods, they overcome the good microbes. And when that happens, it's a setup for inflammation in the gut, which sometimes later on is called leaky gut. The reason that people feel so fatigued is often they have this inflammation or imbalance in their gut. Food is not being broken down properly. You're getting actually more toxic substances formed when their food is being digested. Whereas if you're eating a healthy choice, the breakdown products of the food are healthy options for your gut that help to nurture the gut and helps it to do its functions. So I like to say, a happy gut is a happy mood. But the reality is if you're not eating a great diet, then the bad microbes take over, and inflammation just makes people feel fatigued. They have brain fog. They just feel a slump sometimes in the afternoon when they're working, and those types of things. So really, it's important to understand that in the context of the gut-brain connection.
Fascinating. Well, we're going to take a quick break and be right back with Dr. Uma Naidoo. The book is This Is Your Brain on Food. Stay with us.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Wednesday night at 8:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Welcome back to Healthy Living. My guest today is Dr. Uma Naidoo, the author of the new book called This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, PTSD, ADHD, anxiety, OCD, and more. Dr. Naidoo, you were talking about the link between the brain and the gut, but you also said certain foods can affect neuroplasticity. Can you explain what that is?
Absolutely. You know, many years ago, Laurie, we thought that the brain was an organ that couldn't evolve and change. But more recent research over the last few decades has showed us that, in fact, our brain can change. And where this becomes so hugely important and so powerful is that, you know, there are ways in which if we do things that are, say, lifestyle measures, how we eat, doing exercise, sleeping well, paying attention to, mindfulness, prayer, things that actually center us. If we're starting to pay attention to almost a more whole body approach, it becomes really important because, in fact, our the brain cells can evolve and change in a more positive way. And that's what's called neuroplasticity. And where food comes into this is that the inflammation that I mentioned in the last, when you asked me the last question, well, that gut inflammation, that imbalance in the gut can actually, in a feedback loop, start to call what we call neuroinflammation or inflammation in the brain. And that is where, as a doctor and as a psychiatrist, and my work as a nutritional psychiatrist, I will see an uptick of someone with mood symptoms, or I'll see someone who has new onset of severe anxiety, because that basically has led to inflammation in the brain. Where food becomes important is we can actually start to eat anti-inflammatory foods. We can start to eat healthier foods, and we can start to help impact reducing that inflammation in the brain and helping build back good positive elements of the brain and body based on that gut-brain connection.
And you also say in your book that what we eat can increase or decrease neurooxidative stress. Can you explain what neurooxidative stress is?
Absolutely. So, you know, it's interesting. You will often see or read that we should be eating blueberries, and people know that it's called an antioxidant food. Antioxidant-rich foods are foods that are rich in things like plant polyphenols and basically help to nurture those gut microbes, feed them the food that they need to do well. And by them eating well, they help us to do well physically and emotionally. So basically, what also happens in the body, and the reason that we need to eat antioxidant-rich foods, is that there are radical oxygen species that get formed through natural processes in the body. And if left on their own, these radical oxygen species can cause damage to our body and to our brain. So by eating antioxidant-rich foods, we are actually combating those radical oxygen species and helping with that oxidative stress. Because if they are left on their own, they start to cause oxidative stress. And that's really bad for our body, has an impact on cancer development, has an impact on heart disease, gastrointestinal conditions, but also mental well-being. So really, by paying attention to antioxidant-rich foods, we are combating oxidative stress, which is really good and much better for our mental well-being.
So we've been talking in general terms about healthy foods and unhealthy foods. You mentioned sugar. Can you be a little bit more specific now about what people should be eating, how much of it, and what they should definitely be avoiding?
Absolutely. So it's sometimes easier to go through the shorter list, Lori, because I always like people to feel they have more choices rather than saying you can't eat this and you can't eat that. So let's start with those and get them out of the way. We know that the added and refined sugars from processed, ultra-processed foods, junk foods, and fast foods are really not good for us. Unfortunately, things like French fries from fast food restaurants are actually made with added sugar. We don't taste that, but they're made to be hyperpalatable. So just be aware that there's hidden sugars, and there are also up to 200 other names for sugars on food labels. So you might actually not realize that you're buying a savory food like a salad dressing, a pasta sauce, or even ketchup. And you may not recognize that it's the word for sugar is just a different word, because there are up to between 200 and 250 other names for sugar. So be aware that it's sometimes hidden, and you want to be careful about avoiding that. Another big group is artificial sweeteners. When people are trying to cut back on sugar, they sometimes go to sugar-free alternatives. Several of the artificial sweeteners, unfortunately, can drive anxiety, worsen depression, and disrupt those gut microbes. So again, we want to be careful there. Another category is processed vegetable oils. And unfortunately, it's a less expensive oil, so it's often used by fast food restaurants and some restaurant chains, not everywhere, but sometimes. So it's something that unfortunately causes more inflammation in the body, and we want to stay away from that. And then we know about things like trans fats that we want to stay away from as well. And those are some of the categories to limit and keep away from if you can. And then the foods to include are things like prebiotic and probiotic foods. Now, prebiotic foods are things like asparagus, the allium family, garlic, onions, leeks. Think about a soup that you could make, or another dish that you could use for that. They could also include vegetables like jicama or Jerusalem artichokes, just interesting foods that can help those gut bacteria along, and add them into your diet. Doesn't have to be a supplement, actually can come through food. With probiotics, it can be a supplement, but you can also get those active life cultures from good sources of yogurt or fermented foods. Fermented foods are things like kefir, kombucha, miso, and so many others that you can add in, say, to a salad or a dish that you're making that will really, again, bring back live active cultures to the gut microbes that will help nurture them. Another great category is just your fruit and vegetables. Often when a doctor says, eat your leafy greens or, eat a salad, people roll their eyes and, they feel like, what? I'm sure I know that that's healthy, but it turns out, Lori, that these are also very healthy for your brain health. And why is that? Because when people say eat the color of the rainbow, those rich and different bright colors of the fruit and vegetables, again, bring back those plant polyphenols, which are rich in antioxidant and anti-inflammatory substances, which help our brain health.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back to talk about more of the foods that are good for your brain. Stay tuned.
Introducing the CBN Bible from CBN.com. Now, an easier way to study the Bible and grow in your faith. Highlight your favorite verse. Read separate versions at a glance. Click and read a commentary. or cross-reference your favorite verse using the Strong's Concordance. All the right tools to study the Bible, all in one place. The CBN Bible, available at cbn.com/Bible or the iTunes App Store.
This is CBN Newswatch.
Thanks for joining us.
Watch breaking news, exclusive stories and programs, credible news reporting.
We show you what's happening in the world and how you can pray about it.
This is CBN Newswatch, because truth matters. Weekdays at 5 on the CBN News Channel.
Woohoo! Hi, Superbook fans. Here's something else you'll love. It's the new Superbook Bible app. It's packed with games, activities, and Superbook episodes that you can watch for free. Oh, no! There's trivia, a fun daily devotional, and answers to your Bible questions. Plus, an easy-to-understand Bible the whole family will enjoy. You can even create your own Superbook character. Ta-da! Whoa!
No super balls, man. Come with...
Sorry, pardon me. Sorry, excuse me. Ouch!
Are you getting this?
Earn super points to win daily prizes, too. And so much more! Time to get back to my adventures. See you soon! It's the new Superbook Bible app. Free downloads on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon.
Welcome back to Healthy Living. We're talking with Dr. Uma Naidoo, author of the new book, This Is Your Brain on Food. And you were talking before about all the wonderful things that improve our brain function, and leafy greens is another one that you highly recommend people eat.
Absolutely. So, Lori, leafy greens are not just, food we should try to throw into a salad, but they actually contain nutrients like folate and iron. Folate, when there's a low level in the brain, actually can lead to depression. So it's something that we can very easily add into our salads and to our foods, even a stir fry or some other healthy dish. But the other thing about those colorful rainbow of vegetables, eat the color of the rainbow or your leafy greens, is vegetables, fruit, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, and healthy whole grains all bring back fiber, a very important nutrient to those gut microbes to help nurture them. So that's the other reason we should be including them. And then don't forget spices and other healthy nutrients that we can bring in from other foods.
And you say, does it always have to be fresh, or do you advocate things like frozen or canned?
Absolutely, Lori. Frozen foods, I just say to people, look out for the added sodium, salt, syrup, or sauce. If they have none of those, you can buy large sizes of frozen vegetables, even frozen blueberries and other fruit, and they are cost effective. They will not perish, and you can use them, in all of your dishes. So I think that frozen vegetables are a great choice. They are flash frozen in the U.S., which means they are frozen at their peak. Canned legumes are a great option for plant-based protein. Just rinse out the liquid that they come in. You can actually get things like canned salmon. Canned sockeye salmon is great and rich in omega-3 fats. Great brain food. Things like clams and oysters that are canned are also great options. So those are ways that you can actually, still eat great brain foods on a budget.
And so we know that so many people worry that it's going to cost too much money to eat healthy, but you're saying that's not necessarily true if you know a few tricks.
That's exactly right. If you know a few tricks and you follow things like, yes, it would be great if we could get farm fresh vegetables or have everything organic, but that's not always possible. And what we'd like to do is look at lists like the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. So that's a way to look at the vegetables that you really want to try, like strawberries, for example. Best to buy them organic, but there might be something else that you don't have to buy organic. And then there are those center aisles which have things like beans, dried lentils, and the canned goods we spoke about, which are great options for you, and are healthy foods that you can add to your diet.
All right, we're going to take one final break and be right back with Dr. Uma Naidoo. The book is This Is Your Brain on Food. Stay tuned.
Christians around the world are standing with the Israelis. But why? In CBN's free magazine, Friends of Israel, you'll discover why Christians are supporting the Jewish state, how Israel is fulfilling prophecy as a light to the nations, and ways you can pray for the people of Israel. Israel needs the support of friends like you. Call now or go to cbn.com to get your free copy of Friends of Israel.
Heavenly Father, we do thank you for the work of your Spirit, Lord God, with this movement of getting the Bible,
yes,
Lord, into public schools.
Watch The Prayer Link. Tuesday morning at 7:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Continuing our discussion now with Dr. Uma Naidoo, author of the book, This Is Your Brain on Food. And it's wonderful to understand how certain foods can improve our mood. And Dr. Naidoo, we're running out of time. Any final thoughts?
Absolutely. I think that we need to understand that the silent pandemic going on is one around mental illness, or just people feeling more depressed, more blue, not sleeping well, feeling extremely stressed and traumatized by everything that's going on. And we have the power to actually improve that for ourselves. Not that a person shouldn't see their doctor and take a medication if they need it, but we also can start today at the end of our fork by making healthier choices in how we eat. And I hope that I've shared that with you today.
Where can people learn more about you and also get your book?
My book is available everywhere where books are sold. You can also find it on my website, which is umanaidoomd.com. And follow me on social, sign up for my newsletter on my website. You'll get weekly updates with the latest research, recipes, and more. And my social handle is @DRUMANAIDOO. And we're always sharing updated information that could be helpful to you.
Once again, the book is called This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, PTSD, ADHD, anxiety, OCD, and more. Dr. Uma Naidoo, it was such a pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lori. I really enjoyed speaking to you too.
And we'd like to thank you, viewers, for tuning in to this edition of Healthy Living. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to see other editions of Healthy Living, log on to cbnnews.com and click on the show's link. Once again, I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.